Yeah, recorder's on.
Good evening. I'm Chad Dion Lassiter, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Welcome to our virtual event this evening entitled PHRC and Redeem Presents Reform and Redemption. I want to first and foremost say that this is really going to be about storytelling narratives and narratives analysis. And so we have an amazing group of individuals who I'm going to introduce momentarily, but I just wanted to set the framework that you will hear themes of freedom, themes of equality, themes of resiliency, and ultimately themes of certainly reform, but redemption. And it's very important when we're looking at redemption and with a from a framework standpoint, because it's very important. Right now in our democracy, we know there are aspects of our minds, our bodies, our spirits, and ultimately our souls. Sometimes experience a form of fatigue, a form of erosion, but the human spirit is resilient. And these individuals here, they are certainly experts as it relates to all forms of reform. But once again, I want you to recognize that what we're inviting you to this evening is just a candid, frank conversation around storytelling narratives and narrative analysis. There's an African proverb that articulates the lion's story will never be known if the hunter is the one that tells it. So this evening, you will hear their stories post incarceration, pre-incarceration, during incarceration, their rich stories. This will be a candid, a very fluid, a very genuine, and a very authentic conversation. I'm happy to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Pamela Key. She is the CEO of Key Global Group, LLC. Welcome to our event this evening, Pamela.
Thank you for having me.
We also have William Cobb. He is, this is his brainchild and my brainchild. We wanted to make sure we brought humanity together. And this is just one of a series of things that we're going to be having pertaining to reform, redemption, mass incarceration policy, community to prison pipeline. But welcome, William Cobb. He is the founder of Ferocious and Frontman. Welcome, Will.
Redeem, but I am the founder and the ferocious frontman of Redeem. Thank you, Chad, for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We also have R. Seth Williams, former district attorney of the city of Philadelphia. Welcome, Seth.
How are you? Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to open up with a quick reading before we go into our questions. This is a poem by Huey P. Newton. It's called Revolutionary Suicide. By having no family, I inherited the family of humanity. By having no possessions, I have possessed all. By rejecting the love of one, I received the love of all. By surrendering my life to the revolution, I found eternal life. Revolutionary suicide. I thought that I just wanted to start with that because it's apropos, because oftentimes we may lose material wealth, we may lose status, we may lose certain identities that certainly when we're incarcerated has to be shed away, but we gain a family, we gain a sense of higher humanity. And I'm just really humbled and honored to be in this space with these three individuals, because throughout their experiences, we will come away enriched. And so I want to get right into our questions. Our first part will focus on experiences pre-incarceration and incarceration. Our second part will involve new narratives. And then lastly, we will be taking questions from the audience. I want to start with all of the panelists. And we'll start with Pam, then we'll go to Seth, and then we'll go to Brother Bill. Speak to what your life was like and what was your occupation pre-incarceration. Pam?
Prior to my incarceration, I was sitting in the capacity of a superintendent in Prince George's County Public Schools. So I had spent over 2 decades working in urban environments, trying to serve children who looked like me, who had the similar lifestyle, or at least the beginning of their life from an urban environment. I'm a kid from the South Bronx, and that I recognized that poverty of the pocketbook wasn't poverty of the mind. And I spent my time hoping to give to my children, and not just my biological ones, I call them my non-stretch smart children, those that I served in the schools and school districts, the opportunity of understanding that it doesn't matter where you start, it's where you end. And so for me, I had what I thought was a storybook life. I basically beat the odds of what my circumstances were in terms of my birth, and became and formed a relationship with people and had a career that I think mattered. And what I found, I guess, in this incarceration or pre-incarceration environment, as I look back with this question, that what my life was like was a dream that most people won't ever know to come true if not given the opportunity to have the opportunity to dream in the first place. So I'm grateful and thankful for all that I was able to accomplish, and recognize that in the struggle and the pain of getting from the streets of the South Bronx to a boardroom and as a superintendent was the lesson itself. And that journey and those lessons served me well as I found my career abruptly ending.
Thank you, Pam. Seth?
All right, good evening. So prior to my incarceration, I was the 24th elected district attorney of the city of Philadelphia. And I was the first African-American district attorney in the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But I was adopted at a very young age. I was given up for adoption at birth. I lived in an orphanage and 2 foster homes. I was adopted by a lovely family, a wonderful couple, Rufus and Imelda Williams. And they provided me with everything a child could ever want. But at a very young age, I was exposed to something, that fact of being adopted, and the fact that in August of 1970, we lived in Cobbs Creek. And at the bottom of the hill across the street from our house was a park guard house. My father was in charge of the playground at the top of the park. The bottom of the hill was a park guard house, and a Sergeant Von Collin was murdered while at work one day by men who were Black nationalists. They may have had good beliefs, but the man they shot was an innocent person that day. So my life was shaped at a very young age because I knew my father knew that police officer. He'd been kind to me as a kid. But the police reaction was so over the top and oppressive to the African-American men in our neighborhood that I was torn between the victimization of an innocent person and the racism and the brutality of a system. So my life was I grew up, I went to a Quaker school, I went to Catholic school, I then went to Central High School. So I was formed and shaped with trying to deal with victimization and protecting victims and combating racism. I eventually went to Penn State, where I led the students to end apartheid and getting our school to divest from South Africa. I was the president of student government. I went to Georgetown Law School. I came back, I was an assistant district attorney because I thought to change the system to fight for victims of crime, yet still make it a better system and a more fair system for primarily Black and brown men that were caught up in the system. And I was a young assistant district attorney. I prosecuted thousands of waiver trials, 35 jury trials. I rose through the ranks. I left the office and I ran against my predecessor in 2005.
Lynn Abraham.
Lynn Abraham.
Okay.
Her name isn't mentioned in my children's household. They refer to her just as my predecessor, or she that will not be named. I ran on a platform of being smart on crime, not just tough. She was known as the tough cookie, and we'll talk hopefully about that later. I lost, but I got 46% of the vote. I ran again in 2010. I was elected. I quickly tried to reform the system to make it smart on crime, to only prosecute the right people, to bring about community-based prosecution, to try to help victims heal, to try to address gun violence at the root cause, not just those that got arrested and sending them to jail for a long time, but to try to prevent it on the front end. I was the first DA to prosecute the Catholic Church, the hierarchy of the Catholic Church for shielding pedophile priests. But my life became unmanageable. Supervising 600 people, 70,000 cases, the stresses. And as a result of that, I found myself in federal prison. And I accept responsibility for having accepted gifts and not reporting them. But how they charge people in federal court is much different than the standards in state court. And I'll leave it at that for the purposes of this discussion right now. But those were the circumstances under which I found myself at the time that I was incarcerated.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Bill?
Yeah, thank you. So Chad, I was a young man post incarceration. I went to prison, I believe, at the age of 23. So I was a full-time student at LaSalle University. I was working part-time at UPS, and I was a member of the 33rd Aero Patient Staging Squadron in McGuire Air Force Base as a medical services specialist in the United States Air Force Reserve. So professionally, I was a student. I was working really hard. I was in the Air Force and living, living on the margins, living on the edge. I literally went into the military to escape the environment. I went in as a medic to be a healer and to help people. After getting activated for Desert Storm, um, I was I wasn't in the best mental health upon returning home from Desert Storm, treating
Mm.
people with third-degree wounds and sucking chest wounds. And, to be a 20-something-year-old kid who'd already seen lots of people die, I went into the military for an escape. I didn't go into gun. I didn't go in to do something that wasn't that was going to contribute to what I thought was the horrible things that happen with the militarized forces and countries. So, I went in as a healer, and all I saw was death and degradation. Um, and ended up just coming home and falling into the wrong cliques and the wrong environments, and then succumbing to the things that I ran from my entire life. So yeah, working as a student, working in the Air Force Reserve, whole life ahead of me, and decided to engage in some behaviors that I'm still deeply remorseful for. And that's that,
Wow.
Chad.
Yeah, I want to stay with you, Bill, because the next question actually is for you as well. You and I have had conversations about the school to prison pipeline, but also the community to prison pipeline. And we know fundamentally that there are aspects of our educational system in Philadelphia. Growing up in particular in North Philadelphia, I went to Onley High. I didn't know at the time that it was an educational apartheid system, but the same torn books that my brother had when he graduated in 1986, I entered Onley High in 86 and graduated in 90, and it was the same torn books. Can you speak to some of the educational settings that you emerged from in various stages of your development? You
Yeah,
mentioned
so
LaSalle University, but if you can expand a little bit more, those formative years.
Yeah, so right, getting to LaSalle University is a miracle within itself. Growing up, my grandmother raising me, then my mother having problems with alcoholism, and being a teen who has an alcoholic mother, studying hard. But the education, I ended up going to Germantown High School. I ended up going to Ben Franklin High School. I went to Conwell Middle Magnet School, which was with the best portion of the education I ever had. But the truth of the matter, Chad, is that my experience of education in the city of Philadelphia and in the state of Pennsylvania was that it was very subpar. My education was always supplemented with many of the organizations that you and I contribute to, community centers, or at the time it was the Crime Prevention Network that Benny Swan and them had done, with going to school after R.W. Brown Community Center that used to be at school. So we never, in fact, the entire time that I've been in the city of Philadelphia, I'm 50 years old. I've lived here my entire life. Our education system has always been substandard. It's always had to be supplemented by community leaders or institutions that aren't primarily education, but because they had care, custody, and control of us, we always did our homework at an aftercare center. And it was during those times where you're provided opportunities to actually see that someone sees that you have capacity to learn, you can read, recite, and retain, and we're typically plucked out of those environments when we have the capacity to do really great things with our brilliant minds. But yeah, suffice it to say that the quality of education didn't suffice, although we achieved at its highest levels. And I remember this because in high school, I took an SAT prep because I was in Upward Bound. And then my other colleagues, they also took an SAT prep. And none of them had the capacity to actually get a passing score, but these kids were in the magnet and accelerated classes with me. And only those of us who had actually got education outside of that to supplement those skills are the only individuals who were ever prepared to go to college, who didn't have to go to community college where you were to teach a year or two of remedial courses. We spent a lot more money on law enforcement rather than education. So although I'm far removed from being in grammar school, you know that we've closed 27 schools here in the city of Philadelphia several years ago, and that's having a profound impact on the quality of life of all of the residents in the city of Philadelphia today.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. Thank you, Bill. Seth, we hear the argument and reference of the concept smart on crime.
Right.
What did that mean to you prior to incarceration, during incarceration, and now?
Right. So the concept smart on crime is a concept, a term of art that really grew in around 2008. Then District Attorney Kamala Harris authored a book called Smart on Crime. But before that, it meant, and it addressed the theory that our criminal justice system had just become punitive. That if the issue was gun violence, all we were talking about was prosecuting people that possessed guns with a maximum sentence. If you were a person that was selling drugs, then we would give you a mandatory sentence for you. Whatever it was, whatever the question, the answer was longer prison sentences. That was what the prevailing criminological solution was prior to about 2000 or so, okay? So when we talk about the crime bill of 1995, back then all we were talking about was 3 strikes. Just, we thought that we could scare people out of committing crimes with long sentences. And politicians at the federal and the state level would just pound their chest that they created 20-year sentences for whatever, or, so that was the old thought process. Being smart on crime was to address that by, well, there's an entire science in criminology about the environmental aspects of crime. We can prevent crime with greater lighting. There's fewer muggings in the Washington, D.C. subway system, the metro system, than in the New York system, just because of architectural design and lighting, right? What can we do to prevent crime? So Smart on Crime is about trying to do all that you can to prevent crime on the front end, all that you can to help victims heal, all that you can to help those that are caught up in the criminal justice system. Let's address their criminogenic needs. Well, what is it that caused Seth or Bill or Pookie or Man, right, to do what they did? And if we can understand that, what can we do to help them so that they don't repeat that behavior? Being smart on crime is what can we do for those that are incarcerated to learn all that they can learn so they don't become repeat offenders? What can we do so that when they come home, they can have a smooth transition? Are there things that we do in our society that prevent that? So previously we had all types of laws. If you came home from state prison in Pennsylvania, you could not get a job cleaning toilets in a nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have all these prohibitions for licenses, employment, housing based on a criminal record, those types of roadblocks and barriers often, in fact, lead to continued criminal behavior, because those that are caught up do not have the opportunity or a road, a ramp off of that highway. So to be smart on crime is to say, okay, if there is prostitution along Cobbs Creek Parkway at a certain time, and we don't want that behavior, well, what can we do as a community to prevent that behavior?
Now, let me ask you, that same analysis that you just unpackaged, was that your thinking when you were incarcerated?
So that was my thinking when I was a young assistant district attorney looking at a broken criminal justice system.
Okay.
About what I could do if I ever got the chance to be the boss, right?
Yeah.
I used to work at Sears and Roebuck when it was at 63rd and Market, right there where Millburn meets Philadelphia. And
you take it way back.
yeah. When I worked at Domino's Pizza, when I drove cab, wherever I've worked, I've always thought, man, if I was the boss, this is what I would do. Right.
Yeah.
And so when I was a young assistant district attorney, I thought, man, the system is just broken. I mean, just from a logistical standpoint, from a moral standpoint. And I thought, well, what would I do if I became the boss? And so the Smart on Crime, not just tough, was on my shirts, was actually a criticism and a critique of my predecessor. I tell now Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris, if I had registered that trademark, she would owe me royalties on her book that I used to teach in law school, right? But what I came to really learn when I was incarcerated was how we prosecute people at the federal level for things that we couldn't even charge them with in state court. We would get laughed out of court in state court for the things and the ways in which they prosecute people in federal court. And often when they can't charge people in state court, they prosecute them in federal court because the standards are so much different. So that's one of the things I learned. I also just learned more just about the humanity of the system that I had been a part of and a leader of. I thought I was doing all that I could, first and foremost, as an African-American man, to make the system better for our people. I thought I was fighting for us because the majority of crimes committed against Black people are committed by Black people. Truth be told, the majority of crimes committed against European Americans are committed by European Americans.
Yeah, that whole notion that we sometimes forget when we turn on the nightly news and we hear the myth of Black on Black violence, as opposed to understanding that people kill people that they live in close proximity to.
The majority of people committing rape against white women are white men. But what I learned while I was away, in addition to all this, the empirical data, was just the humanity of the guy who was sitting right next to me, what his life experience was and what led him to get there. And how we're all, the human condition, we're all so interconnected and so similar, regardless of what we think or where we are. And as I would listen to these men in AA meetings, you know, the fact patterns of our lives might be totally different, but the emotions are exactly the same.
Okay.
So I really came to learn a lot about how so many people should not have been in prison. How there's so much that we could have done. Yes, we need to prevent crime. People who violate laws and agreements that we have as a society.
Did we lose audio?
If we lost audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. I just saw how punitive the criminal justice system had become and how so many of these people just needed a redirection.
And we're going and hold that point if you can, because we're going to get to those factors of humanity and what's needed. But the next question is for all three panelists. We're going to start with Pam, then go to Bill, and come back to you, Steph. The day before you did what actually occurred, what could have been done differently, if anything? Starting with you, Bill.
You gonna start with Pam or me?
We're going to start with Pam and then go to Bill and then Seth. You're right.
I would probably say for me, I would have loved myself more.
Wow.
Because in my case, as is the case with most women who are incarcerated, they are there directly because of a relationship with a significant other. And for me, having the opportunity to look back, what I recognize is that there were signs that I probably ignored. And as a result of that, it cost me what was then my life at the time. And so if I could do anything, I would go back and allow myself to give myself permission not to be the workaholic that I was, to make giving to others more important than self-care for myself, and to take the time to really evaluate why in my personal life, I wasn't having the level of success that I was having in my professional one. And I think if I took that time and allowed myself to have a Club Med moment as opposed to Club Fed, which is where I wound up getting to.
You say Club Fed?
Yeah, Club Fed.
Yeah.
I think that the outcome or my choice in what cost me, what was my life at the time would have been fundamentally different. And so for me, it's just recognizing that probably at that time that I was depressed, but didn't recognize it. I masked it in accomplishments and success that made me feel as if I was good. And I exerted and exuded and looked like I had it all together. But
Yeah.
like so many, when you shut the door and you're alone with yourself, you find out, or you know that you don't, and that becomes exhausting. And usually in an exhaustion, you have some stinking thinking. And if you act upon those thoughts, your choices can be therefore flawed, and those flaws have consequences.
Where are you at now, Pam, with regards to that love barometer? Like you spoke about, that self-love. Where are you at in this stage in your life with regards to that love barometer?
I have learned that I can't expect love or receive love from others that I don't give to myself. And that the best example that I could be for someone is to tell them that, the Whitney Houston had this song that said, learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. That is true. Because I think in part what we don't recognize is that from birth till now as adults, like the first 7 years of our lives, we are programmed, and adversity that you endured as a child or things how you're programmed, we then spend our adult lives having to look back on the habits and patterns and the way we view the world and unpack them and view them in such a way that we get to redefine who we are.
Yeah, yeah.
And so to me, I just recognize that love, and beginning with oneself, you can't give what you don't got.
Yeah, yeah.
And for me, I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to realize that and to regroup, and to do nothing more to ensure that my daughters and any other voices listening to us this evening, or even any place that I go, that we recognize that if we are talking about ourselves as human beings, love is the driver that connects us all.
Yeah.
And it is from that place, or the lack thereof, that most of what we do, rightly or wrongly, emerges.
Wow. And as I go to Bill, I'm reminded of the work of Dr. Naeem Akbar, that the highest form of knowledge is to know thyself. Bill and I were in a conversation maybe about 2 weeks ago, and he was just talking about some things. And as we were engaged in that conversation, it activated a childhood trauma that I thought was deeply buried within me. And Brother Bill remembers this. He wanted to come through the phone. He said, "Are you okay, Brother Chad?" And we both found ourselves as accountability partners in prayer, just talking about a lot of the pain that we've overcome, but still some of that pain that we're still in. So the same question for you, Bill. The day before you did what actually occurred, what could have been done differently, if anything?
Certainly many things could have been done. Someone could have given me a hug. Someone could have told me that things were going to be okay. I could have gotten treated for my PTSD from, my military service, from my childhood. It's a profound question for you to frame it and ask me, because I've spent my life becoming the person that I wanted to meet that day. The person who would intercede, the person who would say, "Hey, what are you considering? What's going on with you? Are you eating? Are you clothed? Are you hungry? How do we tie a knot? How do we get some hope and inspiration in you? And how do we send you off to go ahead and," because I was doing everything that I could. I navigated all those challenges alone. Getting to college alone, getting to the Air Force alone, going to war, coming back alone. And I'm trying to navigate life after all of that alone. And what I needed more than anything else was someone who loved me, someone who believed in my capacity to continue making the world a better place, instead of engaging in something that harmed myself, harmed other people, harmed the community. And so for me, just meeting myself or meeting someone that way would have profoundly changed outcomes in my life. So the great part about it is that having that lived experience myself, I am now that for far too many people. Never thought that I would be able to inspire, to encourage, or that people would come to me for solutions that they couldn't get from anywhere else in the world. And they actually have the ability to talk to anyone in the world. And so I think that I think I said this to you. My misery has become my ministry, and I
Yeah.
became the very thing that I've needed for all people.
Amen.
Yeah. As I go to Seth, when you said that a couple of months ago, I actually ended up taking it from you. I didn't plagiarize. I actually gave you credit. But for those of you who are viewing this, when we first started, we just gave quick little introduction of who these individuals are, simply because we want you to do your due diligence to Google each of these panelists, because you will find out that not only will you learn more about their humanity on that level, but you could juxtapose it against what you're learning here in the moment. So same question for you, Seth. You know, take us there. You know, the day before you did what actually occurred, what could have been done differently, if anything?
Well, I think the primary thing that could have been done differently for me would have been if I had then the relationship with my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ that I have now. If I had that then, I would not have been in that space. But in the very onset, you read a poem from Huey Newton.
Yes.
And I really believe that my life, while I lost, as a result of my prosecution, incarceration, I lost my reputation. I lost my elected position. I lost my city pension of $122,000 a year every year the rest of my life when I would turn 55 2 years from now. I lost my house. I lost my law license. I lost my liberty and time with my daughters and loved ones. All that's true. But really, I gained so much more as a result of the journey and the experience that I've been on. But if you were to ask me, in addition to that, what would I have done differently, right? Is that I think, at the time, I was prosecuted. I entered a guilty plea after a great first 2 weeks at trial. We had one bad day. The feds had charged me with 29 felonies. And we could talk all about that, or you can wait for the book to come out to read all about that. Dwayne Johnson's going to play me in the movie.
I'll give you a blurb. I'll give you a blurb.
But what I tell people is that at the time, and when I became the district attorney in 2010, I was prepared strategically and operationally to be the district attorney. I was not prepared emotionally for what I was about to go through. In addition to being the DA daily, right? I taught in law schools. I was a major in the United States Army. I was a senior defense counsel for the Pennsylvania Army National Guards. I was a public defender for the 28th Infantry Division. I was the father of 3 daughters. I had gone through a divorce and was I was with a relationship with a wonderful woman at the time, right? But I was underwater on the mortgage of my house, paying for my kids to go to private school because we talked about the educational apartheid in the city of Philadelphia. And it's almost like if you care for your children in Philadelphia, you've got to send them to a private elementary school if you have the means and the ability. So I was prepared strategically and operationally, but emotionally, as a result of having been given up for adoption at birth, my whole life, I struggled with abandonment and rejection issues, seeking affirmation and validation from others. I think Dr. Key spoke a little bit about that in her perspective. I was struggling with that as well. And then at the time, I had 2 phones on me at all times as the DA. And I see Mr. Leland Kent is on. He knows one of my phones went off every time there was a shooting, a robbery, a homicide, a missing child. When Sergeant Robert Wilson III was murdered. You know, I was rushed to the trauma unit to be there in the trauma unit at Temple with the mayor, the police commissioner, crying police officers. When a building collapsed on firefighters, I was there.
Yeah.
Going to funerals for children that were the innocent victims of crossfire in the street.
Fahim Childs.
What's that?
Fahim Childs.
Yeah, right. And then being asked to speak at the funerals. It just became so much that in addition to those traumas of reading on the phone the most horrific things of our human experience every day, having the responsibility of deciding who's going to get the death penalty, which I should have just been opposed to, but trying to use it in a way that, well, all these supervising 600 people, many of them had been my friends since 1992, and those issues, plus just my own weakness as a man, I began to numb myself with alcohol. Just martinis at lunch. Everywhere I went, there was free alcohol. Everybody's trying to give me something.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I numbed myself from just I didn't know how to talk to somebody. I didn't have people that I could trust, or I felt I could trust. Because if I talked to somebody who I thought I could trust, the next week they're working for some other candidate and they're telling the clout section of the Daily News, Seth did this, Seth did whatever. So it just became, and I should have had a very smaller circle. And so just all of this, my life became unmanageable.
Okay.
And so, you know, but if I had that stronger relationship with Jesus and faith in God, I would have been able to give him all the glory at the time and not try to tweet about how I brushed my teeth in a great way the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I would have been able to handle all of those traumas by just putting them on his altar and praying about it.
Yeah. As I come to Pam, you said so much there. So did Pam, and so did Bill. Bill and I have been admirers of one another's work for about 10 years. And he has been patient as he's reached out to me over the past decade. And we find ourselves in this moment now. And it's a moment because God has ordained it for this time. And then from Bill, I'm able to meet Pam, and I see what God's going to do there. If you recall, in 2005, you and I were chosen most influential African Americans by the Philadelphia Tribune, 10 under 40 in 2005. And we would always see each other at the Bellevue Sporting Club. And you always had an encouraging word. I always had an encouraging word for you. And I remember that aspect of what you're saying, cocktails, because you and I had drinks in the Ritz-Carlton. And in the midst of the drinks, you had to go. Some sort of, Philadelphia incident occurred, and you said, Chad, go ahead and enjoy yourself. I need to let you know publicly, man, I drank your tab under the table, brother. I had the Belvedere and cranberries coming, but that's just a moment of satire. But to everything that the three of you have stated, that whole aspect of unacknowledged trauma. And people sometimes say, well, wait a minute. If you grew up in the church, or you grew up here, you grew up there in the house of faith, how is it that you're saying you found Jesus Christ? Like Jesus Christ wasn't lost. But the reality is what you're articulating is knowing him for yourself. I heard a great sermon of Martin Luther King that said, even though he came out of seminary and even though he came out of that Black prophetic church tradition, it wasn't until he experienced some of the sting of white racism and white supremacy that he fundamentally understand he couldn't call his mother, he couldn't call his father. He had to get down on his knees and know Jesus Christ for himself. Amen. So I think that context really resonates. Pam,
yes.
When we look at systems, what could any system have done to make your outcome differently? And the reason why I'm pushing us in this direction is because I want to think more broader and systematically beyond the criminal justice system, because there are some other systems that if they were improved, maybe if we reverse the economic injustice, if we change the environmental racism, what I mean by that is sometimes we may see tires and decay, and we may see, just utter destruction in our communities. Seth mentioned earlier, lighting. We don't take that in consideration. But for you, Pam, what could any system have done to make your outcome differently?
That's interesting. I'm going to choose to lean to education
Okay,
simply because I think that we've reached a point where we have to all ask ourselves knowledge for what? And that parents are children's first teacher. And when they arrive at schools, the teachers that I work with and principals, one of the things that I, as a result of this experience, began to tell them is that with this pipeline you referred to earlier, and you were talking about community school prison, is that we've been punishing children for circumstances beyond their control. That we've not sat still and recognized that who they are and what they bring to the table could oftentimes be understood if we simply ask the right question. I think we've over-labeled our children as children with special needs, not recognizing that the undergirding or the context through which and by which they became or who they are, what they're expressing, instead we punish it. We have no tolerance for it. And so if I talked about the system of education and parenting as a collective, because they go hand in glove, is that it would have been a better opportunity if we had greater and truer conversations, not about the mistake that a child would make, but why did they do it in the first place? And there's no place or no room to really ask why. And although schools have counselors, for example, they're really not there to talk to a child's social and emotional development or even address their spirit. They just don't. Having spent my entire working life in urban environments with children where the only place they got a good meal was when they were in school,
wow,
that you have to at some point stop and say, where and what are we doing? And where is the first place that one could be saved? And one could be saved first in school. And I'm not talking about the soul, which is what the prior conversations were referencing to in spirit, but this human being in and of itself. And that we cannot, afford, if you will, to punish those children who don't have parents who could send their kids to private school and doom them to a situation. Everyone deserves a quality education.
certainly.
It's a right. It shouldn't be a privilege. And I just hope that we start creating greater conversations around social and emotional intelligence, and that we start really having conversations with our children in their government classes and civics classes. Forget the three branches of government. How does this system really work? The time to learn it is not the time when you're caught up in it. And for me as a woman and personally, I think that there are systems or social systems that exist, and that too often we don't create rooms and conversations where people can just have some real talk and real dialogue. And if it wasn't for my sisters, biological, my sorority sisters, I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. Many of my line sisters, I think have joined tonight, like Kamala. My sisters who were my colleagues at work, who when I was in prison reached out and stood in the gap for my children when I could not as mothers. That we just need to create systems where people recognize that people change people. I never saw a policy or program that did.
Wow, wow. Thank you, Pam.
You're welcome.
Next question is for Bill. What systems are currently failing humanity and perhaps leading to the community to prison pipeline?
Oh, the American criminal justice system. It's never afforded an increase in public safety. It's never afforded an improvement for quality of life. Our law enforcement, this entire system, the way it's designed to literally just shore up capitalism, to make sure that certain segments of the population actually have work and are sustained, and to take other people, the populations, to hunt, capture, and kill those individuals, warehouse them, enslave them, as is legally constitutionally permitted. If you incarcerate someone, you can enslave them. And so that entire system, our entire call and response to crime or so-called crime is fundamentally flawed.
Wow, wow. Thank you, Bill. Pam, coming back to you, what was the hardest thing for you with regards to being incarcerated?
Being separated from my children. That was the hardest thing to do. And then living falsely under the notion for a moment that I could still be as impactful in their lives as I could, and dealing with the number of days, the holidays, the birthdays, the graduations, the things that I missed. So the hardest thing for me wasn't doing the time. The hardest thing for me was not being able to be a mother to my children.
And how many years were you incarcerated?
I had a 78-month sentence. I spent 5.5 years in prison. I had another 2 years under what's called conditions of supervised release, but I was able to get that reduced. And in many respects for me, what we don't recognize is that while we do the physical time, I'm still in prison. Because there are civil penalties that, as a result of having that experience, that punish when time should already be served.
Right.
I paid my debt. Time served needs to be time served.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, great point. Seth, same question for you. What was one of the hardest things? And you mentioned earlier some of the things that you lost. Let's personalize it a little bit more. What were some of the, what would you say was one of the hardest things for you?
Well, I was the district attorney. And so I was driven to court that morning. I had, the difficult decision to enter into a guilty plea for one count. I'd been told by the prosecutors that I could remain on bail until my sentencing that fall. So this was June the 29th, that probably I could remain on bail until the sentencing in October, and then maybe surrender to some prison in November. So I thought I told my daughters that I'd be home after lunch, that we'd have the whole summer to try to work on this together and wrap our heads around it, and to sell my house and to get what they refer to, get your affairs in order, whatever that really means, but to prepare myself and them for what I just threw on them basically the night before. I went to prison. I went to jail. I went to court that day, entered the plea, and the judge, he had his own plan, and he revoked my bail immediately. I was handcuffed in court and led underground from the courthouse to the Federal Detention Center, which ironically is directly across the street from the African American History and Cultural Museum, right? And I was strip searched. And I was given orange boxers, orange jumpsuit, orange t-shirt, orange socks, and some white skippers. Wow. And I was placed in solitary confinement at 759-26066. And I lived in solitary confinement for 152 days.
Now, what was the purpose of that, the solitary confinement?
Well, they alleged that it was for my own good. And that they perceived that the inmates might wish to do harm to me. Where the reality was, yes, all of the inmates knew who 759-26066 had been on the street, but they wanted my help. They wanted me to write letters for them to their girlfriends or their wives, their family, their attorneys. They wanted me to, but I was in solitary confinement in a cell 7 feet by 12 feet, 23 hours a day, all by myself. And the United Nations, Amnesty International, all these organizations say that anything more than 10 days of solitary confinement is deleterious to your mental health. And I got 1 hour a day, Monday through Friday, to go to they would lead me by handcuffs to my own cage on the roof that was still covered, where I was in my own cage where I could just walk around. And that was the 1 hour of a day, Monday through Friday, where I could talk to other inmates who were in their own kennels, basically. You wouldn't even put a dog in most of them at the SPCA without getting PETA mad at you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so that was my life experience. And wow. I'm almost forget what your actual question was now, as I'm just starting.
No. I think you're still there, Seth. It's really centered around the whole aspect of the hardest aspect of being incarcerated, and you unpackaged a lot of that.
The hardest aspect for me originally was just getting hit with, I had no preparation for what was going to happen to me on June the 29th of 2017. I had no ability to prepare my daughters for this, right? So I found myself incarcerated, and in the beginning, just angry for letting this happen, angry for the people who I thought had something to do with making it happen, feeling shame and guilt for letting my daughters down, that I can't be out there to protect them and my girlfriend and my mom where I should be.
Or maybe even yourself, letting yourself down possibly.
So I had to deal with that originally. So that was the toughest part originally. And then, as Dr. Key said, just trying to remain connected. Where I had one telephone call a month for the first 5 months. No email, just letter writing. And then once I got out of there, I was transported to Morgantown, West Virginia. You still have to pay for your telephone calls, your emails, but I would try to write letters. I would try to engage with them by creating word searches, just whatever I could to engage with my daughters and loved ones. And again, to mirror what Dr. Key said, the greatest challenge for me was to remain
Seth, we lost your audio again.
Yeah, I think we lost. We
every
lost.
day.
Yeah, he's back. Okay.
It just became, it just aggravated all of the underlying issues that I had struggled with my whole life.
Okay. Thank you, Seth. Bill, what was the personal mentoring that you received while incarcerated? You've spoken about some of those. We have the old heads and the young boys. You spoke about some of those old heads who really actually took you under their wings while you were incarcerated. If you could speak to that, and then those transferable skills that they provided for you, Bill, how did you model those skills while you were actually incarcerated? I mean, we know, and if you want to, extend that to what you're doing now, certainly, but if you could just unpackage that for us, Bill.
Yeah, I think I'll just answer the mentoring question, and all of you, I'm probably going to cry while talking about this. So my wife is handing me some tissues. It's only because my mentor, I went into Camp Hill, I think in the summer of '94, and for classification. And Camp Hill is a very violent, dangerous prison. And so I didn't know how I was going to do my incarceration. I initially got locked up and thought although I was initially given a 6.5-year sentence, 6 to 12-year sentence, I pretty much thought that I would end up spending at least 20 to 40 years in prison because so many of the men in my neighborhoods and communities have had such long, lengthy sentences. Many of the men that I was talking to when I was, pre-sentencing or, were telling me the kind of time that I was possibly going to get. So I was fixed that I would do about 20 years. And so when I got to Camp Hill, after only getting a 6 to 12-year sentence, I got in with the wrong clique. I was immediately about to become violent and dangerous and do whatever I needed to do to be comfortable in prison among killers and violent folks. And one day we're in the yard and we're planning to attack these dudes that come out after us. And I'm walking in the yard and Malik Aziz, and I'll just say his name because Malik Aziz recently passed away. He walks over to the group and he said, "Yo, youngin, what's up with you?" Wow. And I said, "What?" He said, "Let me holler at you." And I'm like, "What you mean? Like, you don't want anybody who's a stranger to approach you in prison on a jail yard who's older, inviting you to take a walk with him." So I'm with my 4 colleagues and I'm just like, "You hold this knife, you hold this knife."
Yeah,
so gave them the knives and Malik told them, he said, "No, y'all can walk behind us, stay close." And Malik just asked me who I was. He said, "I've been watching you. I see you kind of smart. Where you from?" "I'm from North Philly." "I'm from North Philly too." Wow. "What else about you?" And I tell this guy that I was in college and I tell him I was in the Air Force. And he's just like, "I was in the military. And this person was in the military. And this person was in the military." And so being a kid in 23 and you go to jail, you don't think that you're going to meet men who would accomplish anything in their life. certainly not who had been to school or had been in the military. So that day, instead of actually stabbing someone, me and Malik, we walked the yard that entire day, that entire hour, whatever, for yard out, just getting to know each other. I get back to my cell. A sergeant comes and drops a big box of books into the cell, like probably an hour after being locked down. I don't bother it. It's the next time to go out to the yard later on that day. And I'm headed out to the yard and the sergeant says, "Kyle, where you going?" I was like, "I'm going to the yard." "No, you ain't. Come here." And I come downstairs and I'll never forget him. His name was Sergeant Mahady. And I remember him because he spent 35 years at Camp Hill. He was attacked during those very violent riots. He wasn't liked among Black and brown people who were in the prison. And he told me, he said, "You ain't going to the yard. You're going to teach this damn GED class. You a
Wow.
bookworm. You smart, huh? You like reading. Well, you've been to college, huh? You've been in the Air Force. Oh, well, we're going to put you to work right now." And I sat at the table for every yard for about the next month, and for 2 yards. And I taught GED classes to the men who were studying for their tests. And they passed with the highest scores in the history of Camp Hill's GED program. And my mentoring in prison started like that and remained like that the entire time. While incarcerated, I was doing activism work, letter writing campaigns, organizing, reading, college courses, college studies. And literally it was just a bunch of Black men who were incarcerated just like me, who saw that I had a shorter sentence than them and wanted to invest in me the things that I hadn't gotten yet. And that's it in terms of mentoring. And obviously, what that's done is that anybody will be able to just Google Malik Aziz and see the work that he's done.
Certainly.
I tell people this all the time, Chad, that all the work that I've done since my release in January of 2000, from ultimately becoming the national deputy director at the ACLU and leading the largest campaign in their 100-year history, is literally just attached to the foundation of work that I began with Malik Aziz. So what does it mean to have a mentor? It's profoundly changed my life. And today, many of those men are still the people that I'm accountable to. Some of them are home now. Many of them are still incarcerated. Many of these people are my colleagues, my peers, and my allies. And I have children and I have wives. So those men have become a profound part of my life, and are part of the fabric of men in the city of Philadelphia who are working to restore the lives of the 100 million people who have been in touch with the criminal justice system, not just in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, but throughout the globe today.
Wow. Wow. We're going to ask everyone that comes in to mute yourselves. And I'm going to ask the host, Lynette, as individuals still come in, for them to mute themselves, because we want to honor the space that our panelists are in. We're in the midst of a very, very emotional, spiritual, and much needed conversation around storytelling narratives and narratives of analysis that really, we just want to be kind and honor the space of our panelists. Seth, you spoke earlier about your spiritual journey, but I also want to be able to have you in this space to speak a little bit more about your spiritual journey and the whole aspect of the role that spirituality played while you were incarcerated and post-incarceration.
All right. Well, thank you. And again, I have to say that, people ask me, well, how did I get through what I got through, knowing where I was? And I'll say, or they'll say something about how they interact with me now and what they think of me now. And what I'll say is, look, I only got through what I went through by the grace and mercy of God. But my own spiritual journey is one that, yes, I was the child. My father was the son of an AME minister. My father didn't drink, smoke, or curse. But he went down to Houston to teach at Texas Southern College for Negroes, now known as Texas Southern University. And he married himself a Creole girl that was 10 years younger that did all three well and often. So they were like the yin and the yang, okay? And
that sounds like that Club Med that Dr. Key was talking about.
And sound like me and my wife, actually.
Oh, wow.
But my father converted to Catholicism My father converted to Catholicism when he married my mother in 1950, and he became a much better practicing Catholic than she was. But so I went to church every Sunday or 3 Sundays out of the month my whole life. But despite being what I considered a good Catholic boy, right? I was the head altar boy in 1981. That really caused a lot of stress and pressure on me because everybody in my neighborhood, it was like I was a preacher's kid. Everybody knew my dad from the rec center. And I was under the microscope all the time because the nuns thought that I was like the perfect kid. I wasn't the perfect kid. I wanted to do all the same stuff that Sylvester Sills did and Rodney Holloman and what they were doing, right? But there was an expectation that I was not. And so that always caused an inner conflict in myself. But the point is, when I got to prison, despite having been a lifelong, what I thought was good Catholic guy, good Christian man, I had never read the Bible from Genesis to the last word in Revelation ever. So being in prison, having lost all those things that I told you I lost, right, is when God was all I had, I learned that God was all I needed.
Wow.
Okay. And I learned all the things I was chasing to find happiness externally, I didn't need. All I needed was relationships, my relationship with God, my relationship with those that truly loved me. Everything that I needed for 3 years was in a locker in my cell that was 3 feet high, 2 feet wide, and 1 foot deep. All the extra stuff that I thought I needed in my garage, that new lawnmower that I could ride on and have a beer on, or the new 52, inch flat screen this, or the Rolex that I needed, and this. Man, I didn't need all that.
Yeah.
I had 1 coffee cup for everything. Right? So, but my spiritual journey began just reading the Bible every day to try to engage my mind. I spent so much time reading the Bible every day, reading other novels, self-help books, things about how other people got through prison or prisoner of war camps or the Holocaust, plus poetry. But I began having just spiritual things start happening to me. And as a young boy, I always wanted God to talk to me. I thought that meant that one day a cloud would come in the window and there'd be an angel with a harp talking to me.
Yeah.
Well, what I learned while I was in prison is God speaks to us every day.
Yeah.
Through other people, right? Through the beauty of nature. Are we listening?
Yeah.
And so I had so many profound experiences. I had one where I was just so depressed. I was writing my daughters a letter. I said, you know what? I need to pray. So being a good Catholic boy, I pulled out my rosary out of my pocket. I started saying Our Fathers and Hail Marys. And I wanted God to give me the strength and the power and the courage to, how am I going to get through a 60-month sentence? How am I going to do this? About 10 minutes in reciting those prayers, I said, you know what? I need to have some Baptist prayer up in here. I need to start talking to God directly. So I said, God, look, like I was talking to my own father, right? Trying to talk to God because he's my father. I'm talking like I would tell my dad, Dad, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. You showed me how to do everything from tying my shoes to driving a car, throwing a football spiral. How am I going to do this? Then I said, you know what? I need to have Quaker meeting up in here. I go into Quaker school, and the Quakers believe that God speaks to all of us. We don't need an intermediary. We don't need a bishop, a rabbi, an imam, but that God speaks to us through silence. So I said, you know what? I'm going to sit up here on my chair, on my bed, cross my feet like when I was in elementary school, and I'm just going to sit in silence because they believe God speaks to us in silence. So I'm sitting there in silence, 5 minutes later, I hear pounding on my door. I look over at my cell door. It's the one black CO in the shoe. That's where I was, the hole.
Mm.
In addition to being the only black CO, he was also a Baptist minister and Nigerian. And he said, "Mr. Williams, what is wrong with you?" I was like, "I don't know, Mr. Kano. I don't know. Mr. Williams, did Nelson Mandela kill anyone?" I was like, "No." "Did you kill anyone?" "No." "Mr. Williams, you are a smart man. You are an educated man. You will get through this.
Wow.
Have courage. Have hope. God loves you." And he walked away. I was like, everything I just been praying for the last 35 minutes, this brother said in like 15 seconds. And it blew me away.
Yeah.
Okay. I told the priest that day. The only people that came to talk to me every day was the priest and the psychologist to check in, and the people giving me food through a little door in my cell.
Wow.
Right. So I tell the priest is like, "God is working miracles through you right now." The next morning on this spiritual journey. So I've been thinking about my whole life through the whole perspective of Job. Everybody said, read Job, Job. So Job, if you're not familiar, is a book of the Old Testament, and Job lost everything. But the punchline to Job is that Job wanted to know why. Why is this happening to me? God was like, don't worry about why it's happening to you. All you need you came in the world with nothing. You're going to leave the world with nothing. All you need to know is you need to thank God, thank me every day. Bless me every day. That's all you need to do. And then Job was restored. So I'm thinking through my life through the perspective of Job. The very next morning after that Nigerian CO had told me all that, I have my 1 hour of rec. So they come open a little thing in my door called a wicket. That's where they put the food through. And I have to bend down in front of them while they handcuff me. And I stand up. Then they walk me through the hall, handcuffed, to take me to my cage on the roof to walk around in my 7-foot by 12-foot cage, right? So while I'm there, a man whose face, I've seen his face when they walk me through the hall. I've never spoken to him. He comes up to me. "Mr. Williams, may I speak to you?" So again, another Nigerian accent, right? I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Mr. Williams, you don't know me. My name is Bright Ogado." And so he tells me that he is the son of a Nigerian diplomat, that he has his master's degree in finance from Brooklyn University. He was a real estate guy. He got caught up with some stuff in New York. He found himself charged. He felt as though he had just totally disgraced his entire family, that he had let them all down, and he just couldn't go on. But he was downstairs in his prison cell one day in general population. The Federal Detention Center in Philadelphia is like an 8-story high-rise apartment building, basically is what it looks like from the outside. And the top floor is where they put all the people who have been violent in the building, plus me. So all the real the super gangsters and me are on the 8th floor. Right? I'm the original gangster. So
OG.
I'm OG, right? That's why I got the salt and pepper going. So he says all this, and he says that he'd been in general population, and a young brother came into his cell, wanted to use his toilet. And he said, no. In the prison, you have stainless steel toilets, and people take the water out, and it's called the cell phone. So you can talk to people upstairs or downstairs by putting your head in the toilet and talking. And so he didn't know this, and the guy hit him, and he hit him back. And he had a big bandage on his head, and that's why he was in solitary confinement. He said he'd been in solitary for a week. And in addition to already having disgraced his family and let them all down, he just thought that he just couldn't take solitary. And he decided to end his life.
Wow.
And he had written his family his suicide letter, his 5 children and his wife, and he was apologizing to them for embarrassing them, letting them down, disgracing them, and that he thought the best thing he could do was just to remove himself from their lives. He said until right after he wrote that letter, he saw the 2 security guards on each of my shoulders walking me handcuffed through the hall. And he said to himself, that is Mr. Williams. He was the DA. he has lost more than I'll ever lose. Yet he is still standing. If he can survive, so shall I.
Wow.
So he's telling me that he decided not to commit suicide because he saw me. So this whole time, this is like I was in solitary from June until November of 2017. Now this is in November of 2017 when I met him. And so now I'm like, wait a minute. You're telling me, did I hear you correct? He's like, Mr. Williams, my 5 children and my wife still has a husband. My children have a father because of you.
My God.
So then I began seeing it not through the perspective and prism of Job, but through Joseph in Genesis, whose brothers, right, had been jealous of him. They decided to throw him in a pit to kill him. Then they said, you know what? Here come on a slave owner, a slave trader. We're going to sell him into slavery. He got sold into slavery. He became the best slave for Potiphar. Then Potiphar's wife alleged that he raped her and he hadn't. So he goes to jail. He becomes the best inmate. The Pharaoh hears about him. He becomes the Pharaoh's number 2 man and is responsible for rotating crops every 7 years, makes Egypt the great power that it became.
Yeah.
I began seeing my life through that perspective and the punchline of the story of Joseph is in Genesis 50:20. And the punchline is that what others intended for my harm, God will use for the saving of many lives and the benefit of others. So I said, you know what? What I thought through my own selfish lens, I lost everything was bad for me. Maybe this is going to be good for other people.
Wow.
So I went to jail. I taught GED. 19 of my men got their degrees. My man, Bright Agato, whose name literally means light of God. We became friends. And it just became that my life is not about Seth and I was the DA and I'm a member of the Union League. Now I wear a black hoodie. I ride SEPTA everywhere with a black bag across my chest. Nobody knows who I am. I feel totally liberated and I can be my authentic self, just keeping it real, trying to be nice to people on the L, on the Broad Street subway, on the 46 bus.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Beautiful, Seth. We're gonna move into the next part of new narratives. And thanks for the audience staying with us. This question is for Pam. Pam, when you hear the term, the broken politics of punishment, what does that mean? The broken politics of punishment.
Well, it's to me almost like an oxymoron. The statement doesn't really make sense, but it does at least address what I would call the cognitive dissonance that occurs in our criminal justice system. So what do I really mean and what am I saying? If you take the word politics and recognize that that's basically the distribution of wealth, and you look at the word punishment, which is basically an intention to hurt, and then you think about it in terms of our criminal justice system, then I would say that the system as it is and as it's designed is doing exactly what it was supposed to do. So I don't think that it's broken for what it was intended to do. I think what we're now really needing to have a conversation about is why it was formed and who was meant to be caught up in it no longer serves this country, because 1/3 of this country has an arrest or conviction, or let's say a record itself. So when I hear you say it's broken politics, no, it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's doing what it's designed to do. The question I have is, when are we going to stop and ask, if this is really about public safety, how's this working? And not really talk about this conversation from the perception of criminal justice reform. I don't like the word reform because it assumes that all the pieces are here and we just need to reconfigure. I say, no, it's not a criminal justice reform. We need a rethink and a reimagine. And if we put anything after criminal justice, it needs to be transformed because we need something new.
Okay.
And so the system for me isn't broken. It's doing what it was supposed to do. It's just not, and it's doing it so well that now we're recognizing that the problem that they thought they were solving yesterday has created problems today that no one is
Right.
seeking to really address.
Wow.
And that
Wow.
the punishment should, if we're going to use punishment or the idea that something needs correcting, then the right word should have been discipline.
Mm,
Because in the root word of discipline is disciple, and
That's right.
disciple means to teach.
wow.
And at this point in time, we need to move past a system that punishes people, pay attention to where the people who get punished are, and then make a determination whether or not this community pipeline that you spoke to about before, is it really in the name of public safety? And do we really need to define public safety? And then in so doing, what needs to be done to ensure that we're all safe? Because I feel, for the most part, that I'm just a product first of my decisions, but I'm also a product of an environment that was tended to produce me and have this outcome in the first place.
Right.
Wow, Pam, thank you for unpackaging that, because in that tradition, we talk about hermeneutics, which is matters of interpretation, and linguistically, words truly matter. And so you're absolutely right. We should reposition this with a paradigm shift to be prison transformed. I want to stay right there with you, Pam, and ask you a follow-up question. Where are those spaces where change is already occurring, and what spaces are there that still need to be, that are still yet untapped as it relates to prison transformation?
Well, I think that if we take the position that the system and the process, the rite of passage to incarcerate and thus dehumanize, is a well-oiled machine. What's missing is the other side of that coin, is another rites of passage. You dehumanize me, how do you rehumanize me? I didn't lose my humanity when you numbered me, you now just discount me.
Right.
And that if I see efforts where individual people are standing up and speaking out, like Bill, who has made it his life's mantra and advocacy to just speak to the street and let the street be heard. For me, I'm at, when we're incarcerated, you need to start telling people the truth. Tell them that it's going to be hard. Tell them that the odds of you standing up are going to depend on the power of you that you have. Tell them that if you don't know yourself and you have this adult timeout, this is the time to do it.
Wow.
I had opportunity while I was incarcerated because they saw my potential, and I used my service to save myself and others. And as I'm on this side, what I'm doing is speaking to this system and unveiling itself, because for the most part, the people who are sitting on this panel don't consider us when you use the word criminal or felon. They don't really understand the depth of the continuum. They don't understand that I'll have the same needs as someone else that you probably wouldn't have the same needs because they're uneducated. No, when you fall from higher up, you fall faster and harder.
Right.
Yeah.
But still I fell.
Yeah.
And so the space that needs to get done is that we need safety nets. We need to understand that prisonization causes mental health. You cannot go in there and not be traumatized. It needs to be addressed. There needs to be a way to find a safe haven and a place for people to go to, for the lack of word, unpack. You know, it's like, how do I, if you're a deep sea diver and you dive and you come up in this, before they take your air and stuff off, they learn how to decompress you. Decompress people. People, we need to have this conversation, because for me, the most important thing about the process is that what it does to the spirit of people, and that the conversation about mental health needs to precede the conversation about getting a job. Because the need and the strength to survive is not knowing that we know we need a job. We know we need a place to live. But what we don't know that we need, and Seth leaned into it somewhat, is the strength to be prepared for the no. The ability to stand with the stigma as a result of an experience you have. I'm not my number. I'm not my experience. I am that I am. But for those experiences, now my hope is that I can help to save somebody else from going where I went, because I can put a light on it and say, don't do it, Miss Sealy, don't do it.
Yeah. No, that's certainly important, because I'm born and raised in Philadelphia too. And Bill knows this and Seth knows this. In our city, when you fall from quote unquote grace all those people when you were up, all those people that were with you at the Union League, all those people that were with you at Del Frisco's, all those people that ran with you, even if you were going to lose and choose, they're no longer around. So I think about not just Seth, but I think about Congressman Fattah. I think about several people, and you don't have to be a politician and you don't have to be a person we can Google your name and you show up. But to your point, Pam, we have to recognize and we have to teach people that we have multiple identities. Yes, I was formerly incarcerated, or yes, I'm presently incarcerated, but I'm still someone's son. I'm still someone's daughter. I'm still someone's, godparent. I'm still someone's parent. And what happens oftentimes is we already live in a system where white supremacy, institutional racism, prejudice plus power negates our humanity. And then when we're incarcerated, it negates our humanity twofold. And so what you just mentioned was very important. As I come to Bill, I'm reminded of, our community. When Meek Mills was arrested, I was on the Board of Trustees, Philly Prisons for 8 years under Mayor Michael Nutter. I was his first counselor inside the prison. I was the one visiting him, leaving hot meals on the stove, on the table, going to him. About 20 sessions inside the prison because, God asked me to meet with him and to work with him. I never knew anything about his music. Never. I don't come from that generation. And then when he got out, I did some things as well with him in court. But in our community, people were like, wow, he's sitting courtside with Mike Rubin and he's doing this. Why aren't you, hanging out with him? I was only given that assignment for that period of time, for such a time as this. That's what's unique about everything that the three of you are sharing, is that your stories are compelling. And it's not about falling from grace, it's that we all come to a context with a form of fragility, with flawed things, with things that have not been taken care of in our lives. And then, we emerge out of that because of factors of resiliency. But that stigmatization, that being stigmatized stays with us, right? But we have to recreate our identities because we're wonderfully and uniquely made, which leads me to Bill. Bill, we no longer have to frame this question around why do we need prison reform? We can reach consensus that prison transformation needs to occur. What laws could you briefly speak to that will support the very transformation and the various things that Seth started with and that Pam just brought into the context?
Ooh, huge question. But because I was a national deputy director at the ACLU and worked in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and Washington, D.C., I have some answers for you, brother.
Well, that's why I got the question. All of this is connected, right? All of this connected.
So, let's talk about law. Let's talk about policy. People don't know that we literally have over 2,000 criminal justice systems in this country, and how every community responds to crime should be very different because every community is very different. And so when you talk about laws, we pass, literally at my time at the ACLU, I was probably responsible or indirectly responsible for tens of thousands of pieces of legislation getting passed throughout the country. So it's not a matter of what laws necessarily, it's a matter of what is harming communities and neighborhoods the most. And then sequencing your legislation or your policy goals based off of what the community is willing to contribute a fight towards. And I had to do this all over the country because most of the time policy comes out of the shops that are driven by policy makers or influential people who have budgets or who have networks. But very rarely does the policy ever come from the people who are most negatively impacted by the things that are happening where you want to change the policy. So, I will choose something though as not a cop-out. One of the things that we can do that is the most humanizing thing and one of the safest thing and one of the most egregious things that we do in this country is arrest people and make them pay money to get out of jail.
Right.
Ending cash bail is the work that we led at the ACLU, where we began suing the people who were literally financing cash bail industry here in America. So there are three big multinational corporations that are owned by China and other various entities, and American investors invest in them. So dismantling the money systems, but cash bail primarily all over the globe should be ended. The thought that actually to hunt, capture, and to kill somebody, which is the full component of it, but the capturing of innocent people, just to take a person, remove them from their home, charge them amount of money before you say that they can actually be released, when it has zero to do with public safety, quality of life, or any of that. And the very thing that ensures that people actually come to court more than anything else is a text mail or a written notice. That has a higher, so in places where cash bail has been eliminated and it's been replaced with text messaging or a mailing campaign that's robust, the people come to court more frequently for that than they do if they're leveraged with cash bail. So specifically, cash bail can be for the entire globe. Indian cash bail could be, but communities really need to draw their policy from the communities and the people who are being affected the most. We always say the people closest to the problem are closer to the solutions, but usually furthest from the resources and power. They are always away from the policy decision-making tables. And so it's important for us to always bring community to the policy tables and allow for them to design it, to craft it, and to draft it, and for us to work in collaboration with them to take it to the places and spaces that they don't have the relationships or the expertise or the nuanced understanding.
And Bill, you're to be commended because we won't say in this public space, but you know the work that we've been doing for the past month, leaning up to what we know is coming hopefully next week. You've certainly been bringing people to the table. Seth, we know that meaningful transformation is possible, but is it possible in the current political climate? And the back part of that question is, if you were the district attorney now, how would you run the office differently post your incarceration?
Okay.
Wow.
That's
Hey, you better answer this. You better answer this real carefully, brother.
Dr. Key, that's scholarly there. Look, I had to take a step back myself, Bill. You know, like, I was like, wow, Chad Dion Lassiter, that's major right there, bro.
Hey, be careful on this one, Seth. Somebody might be lining you up for your future.
Well, so what I would say is that you asked several questions. So what I think is that we have to, and it builds on what Dr. Key and what Brother Cobb were saying about transforming the criminal justice system. I think we need to continue and just reshape it. We have to figure out, well, what is it that we want? And then get to that solution. So we have to, we've used, and Dr. Key was saying earlier, you know, I thought as a young prosecutor, my job was, I got these 30 cases, I'm going to win. I didn't know what winning meant. Okay. And so we have to rethink, well, what does that mean? And so what we have to realize is that I saw myself as basically the last resort of the of the social system. Everything else had failed. Schools had failed. The social workers had failed. All that had failed. And then you're in court with me. So let's go back. Let's fix all those things at the front end. Okay. So I was on the National Board of Directors of Fight Crime, Invest in Kids. For every $100 that we could invest in early childhood education saves us $600 on prison costs at the end. I would go talk to kids at school. The number one thing I say to kids, what's the number one thing that people have in common to get arrested in Philadelphia? All too often the kids would go, ooh, 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 Dave's black. Say no. The number, yes, far too many black and brown people are in jail. But the number one thing that all people have in common to get arrested in Philadelphia is they didn't finish high school. So what can we do? We have to do all that we can to reduce truancy and keep people in school, engage parents and their kids in their education. And the apartheid system of education that we have. We have to do that. We have to treat drug addiction and addictions as a whole as a public health problem, not a criminal justice problem. Let's help people address the trauma that has led to their addictions and give them help to solve their addictive, self-destructive cycles like the one I had that forced me into thinking I needed martinis and Jack Daniels and whatever. Right? Or women that weren't the ones that were in committed relationships with me to make me feel better in that moment. How can I do that better? We have to treat gun violence as a public health problem. And we began doing that when I was a district attorney through community-based prosecution, which led to the use of GunStat, using empirical data to know where the violence is. And then I looked for the best practices and I created focused deterrence in Philadelphia. And Brother Cobb was one of our guest speakers every time we had focused deterrence. What does that mean? That's being smart on crime. But how? If you remember a Venn diagram, right, from 8th grade science, if I were to draw a circle of
I'm
those,
sorry, Seth. I went to Ollie High, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm about to say, bro, was no Venn diagrams in the Philadelphia school system.
Well,
Yeah.
at Central High School, we learned about Venn diagrams.
Well,
Okay.
we just had to correct you. We don't want you to lose your point, but Dr. Key, you said you were a superintendent down where you were at. Was there a Venn diagram down there?
Of course there was, and it's taught in math. Come on, guys.
Bill and I didn't have it.
Listen, we went to
Bill and I didn't
Philadelphia
have it.
public
Go ahead,
school.
Seth. We
There
didn't
was
have
no
it.
there was
didn't
no
have
Venn
it.
diagram.
We said we went.
in college.
Yeah, but go ahead, Seth. We just didn't have it. You went to Central. We didn't have that type of school. We went to them schools like where Joe Clark was like, Sam's, if you're gonna jump, then just jump, Sam. But go ahead, Seth.
If I were to draw a Venn diagram of those most likely to, so it's a circle that includes those most likely to be shot, and another circle of those most likely to do the shooting, and put them together. The intersection and the union of those two circles is about 75% in Philadelphia. So with the empirical data that we gather, we can tell you what corners are most likely to be the most violent and who is most likely to be shot and to do the shooting. So if that's true, right? And if they gather all this information on our smartphones to know what to send me as an advertisement, if we can gather that information, then if we make the political decision, we can reduce the homicide rate in Philadelphia if we want. But since we don't, it's because we don't care about the Black and brown people who are being shot. I used to tell people, one weekend I was a DA, there was 21 people got shot that weekend. 99% of them were Black and brown men in Black and brown neighborhoods. It was like page 12 of the Daily News that it happened. If you let 21 white people get shot at the Four Seasons Hotel, CNN, Fox, they would still be here talking about what happened. So what would I have to do if I was still the DA? And what I learned, I would think that almost all prosecutors, I saw one prosecutor was on here earlier, I would send all judges, all prosecutors, let them go to jail for a weekend at 759-26066, get strip searched, get put in solitary confinement, and just what did they learn from that whole experience just for a weekend? I bet you they walk out much different.
Wow.
I bet you if you put a lot of these people just at 60th and Market, right? And so I'll meet you down at Catherine Street. Just walk that way, walk south. Their lives be different when they got to Catherine Street.
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do is, it's admirable wanting to be in law enforcement. The peacemakers were the only profession that Jesus Christ talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, right? It's admirable to be a peacemaker, but let's do it in a way that is about social justice, making victims whole, preventing crime, and helping those that are caught up in the system so that they can be made whole themselves.
Yeah.
That's not happening now. It's still just punitive. If I was the DA, we'd make it much more restorative.
Okay. Thank you. We have a few more questions, then we're going to open it up to the audience. Want to come to Dr. Key. Pam, what is redemption in your opinion? What is redemption in your opinion?
It's the moment when a person recognizes that it doesn't matter what you call me, it's what I answer to.
Mercy. Wow. Seth, what is redemption in your opinion?
Just a second chance, just mercy and love.
Okay. Bill, what is redemption in your opinion?
I don't think I have an answer for it. That's a great question, Chad. I don't know. For me, it's a process that I've gone through and that I'm helping other people get through. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a feeling. It's being restored. It's being redeemed.
Okay. Really briefly, Pam, can you speak to the elements of humility pre-incarceration, during incarceration, and post-incarceration?
I've always been a person that loved people. Um, and how I loved was always through service. I don't think that my level of humility changed in terms of who I was as a person and how I wanted to change the lives of people by helping them build their capacity to be who they wanted to be. If anything, what has happened, or what's more important to me now, is that the things that I thought mattered really don't. And so when Seth talked about the loss of the material things, and you made mention of the possibility of people who, when, back then, nobody wants me, now I'm hot, they all on me. Like when you're at the top, everybody wants to know you, but you know who your friends are when you're down. I've been blessed. So for me, the people who are still in my corner, the then are still the ones in my corner now. That's, for me, let me know that it didn't matter about my titles, didn't care about the awards, what kind of car I was driving, where I was living, the ability to be called Pamela, to ability to still be loved by people who loved me, lets me know that at the end of the day, that's all we have. That is the currency of life. And
Wow.
that anything that I can do to continue to give that love that's been given to me, I think that's why that's what matters to me most. That's what moves me and gives me purpose.
Wow. Bill, same question to you. Speak to the elements of humility pre-incarceration, during incarceration, and post-incarceration.
Yeah, thanks for that. In the beginning, didn't know what humility was. I was a 23-year-old kid, so no humility. During my incarceration, and extremely humbled. Post, always trying to find balance. In search of balance, always being mindful that if I'm humble, that so many things can flow through me that can't when I'm not. My relationship with Pam is a direct result of intentional humility. Pam is an educator, and I am in pursuit of enlightenment. And because she has the knowledge that I'm in search of, you humble yourself and you get into relationships with folks that allows you to actually receive. I'm not lower, or I'm not, so humility, I'm always in search of and always looking for the balance at this point.
Seth, same question for you. Speak to the elements of humility pre-incarceration, during incarceration, and post-incarceration.
Right. And so I had to pull up the Oxford Dictionary's definition of humility. And it's a modest or low view of one's own importance, humbleness. And for me, again, what I think it was is that I had to learn, right? And the first step basically in AA and in Celebrate Recovery, which I've been sober now for 3 years, is that I had to surrender, that my life had become unmanageable, that I had to recognize that I'm not in control, God is. And so humility for me, I thought before I went away, I still went to get my hair cut because I had hair. I looked like the lost DeBarge brother back in the day. I went to get my hair cut at the ESPM zone, like around 60th and Haverford. Okay. So I still went there every Saturday, even though I had the Tahoe with the dudes driving me. I thought I was still keeping it real, right? I still went to do my own shopping at ShopRite on Haverford Avenue. But I learned that I was like the Pharisees in Luke, and that I thought I was doing good things, but I was kind of doing those things for show. And so humility really was me learning that the service that Dr. Key was talking about is what is my rent here on earth, is the service to others.
That's the currency.
That's right. But I don't need to tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
Just do it. Right.
Yeah.
And so Humility for me when I first got to prison was just learning just to shut up. I was a suicide prevention cadre member, and I was trained to help people that were suicidal. And what I learned from that experience is that when people are in crisis, friends are in crisis, anybody, they don't need us telling them anything. They really just need us to be present for them.
And listen with our spirit.
And listen, just to be there.
Yeah.
You don't need me telling you, oh, your problems aren't that bad. Or don't worry about it. What's on your mind? No, just shut up. Don't just be there.
Yeah.
And so for me, the humility was learning that I am not important, right? As the Oxford Dictionary definitions, my importance doesn't matter. God's important, your importance, our importance. And so humility for me was to learn that, yeah, people upset, dude, why are you catching SEPTA? I'll come pick you up. But what? Dude, I'm cool. I got my hoodie on, right? Got my black hoodie on, got my bag. I'm moving through the subway. I can get anywhere I want. I'm cool. I'm okay. Don't worry about it. I got my little SEPTA key card. I can get on wherever I got to go. But I can just talk to people. And one day, I'm gonna have whatever I want financially, I believe. But the humility is still be what's important. And remembering what's important is just relationships. That's all you got.
Yeah.
That's all I had when I had nothing. And just remembering that, I think is the definition for me of humility. Remembering that I'm not important. What's important is all of us, and that the battle is God's and the glory is his. And then all these things that I'm going through, hopefully other people can learn from it and it'll help them. And that's what matters.
Thank you. Last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Dr. King has a book entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? We know that we have an election coming up. We also fundamentally understand that we are living in a diseased democracy. The great Ben Franklin said that that a democracy is diseased by apathetic vote turnout, and so many other challenges. Here in the city of Philadelphia, we just saw the killing of yet another Black male. We all understand that we have challenges, not just in Philadelphia, but Philadelphia is a microcosm for our larger society. Pam, this is a question that is really hard because we're living in a very troublesome and burdensome time. Economic collapse, not seen since the Great Depression, and so many other things that we can just stay on this Zoom and just talk about forever. But from your vantage point, where do we go from here as a democracy in the space of prison and prison transformation and all of the things that we've attempted to discuss here this evening, in your earnest opinion?
We need to recognize that 1/3 of this country, 100 million people have records, that it's time that the law is written that we become a protected class, because we need to be protected. And by that, if you look at the 100 million, they are mostly Black and brown and impoverished people. But when you protect something, you take care of it. And for me, the possibility of pursuing that as an advocacy through Redeem with Bill is the reason why I'm grateful and thankful to actually still be here and remaining in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. That our democracy is the people. But when your people don't believe their voice matters, they don't speak. And that in not speaking and voting through that process, because many places across this country are disenfranchised because they have a record. But it's time at this particular point in time that we don't just protect women. We don't just protect men. We don't just protect for color. Now we need to protect the people, and 1/3 of us need it. And the time is now.
And as I go to Bill and then Seth, God brings us together for a reason. And you, Bill, and I were talking about how there's some things that God is going to put on my shoulder as the executive director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission when we're talking about protected classes, right? We're in a unique space and time to really revamp, well, actually look at and then possibly revamp our Pennsylvania Human Relations Act to look at pushing through some legislation in the state assembly at that appointed time to really look at this population as a protected class. You're absolutely right, Pam, because when an incident happens, folk will reach out to the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, but it's not part of our jurisdiction. So it pretty primarily just goes to, you know, the Attorney General's office, not talking about complaints and employment and things of that nature, but like if a person says, well, gosh, I went up to SCI Phoenix to visit my cousin, and the way they strip search me, or the way they stigmatize me, or the way they racialize me, or the way they engage in a form of Islamophobia because I was dressed as a Muslim. Those things will come to us, but there's not much that we can do. You know, we have to say, okay, well, let's reach out to the Department of Corrections. So I'm glad you touched upon that, because it's becoming very clear through my third eye, which is my spiritual eye, some things we can do at PHRC. Bill, same thing for you, man. Where do we go from here as a democracy in this space?
Well, you know, my big sister Pam gave the big segue, right? We are relaunching Redeemed, and actually to make sure that 100 million people become a protected class, because there are better than 55,000 collateral consequences, meaning that laws, regulations, or policies where you can just discriminate against us and keep us out of the workforce, keep us out of the community, keep us out of housing. And so that's what it is that we'll be doing. But in regards to democracy and our relationship to it, 100 million people living with arrests and convictions. Many of us now are free to vote as a direct result of the advocacy that Malik did in Pennsylvania 20 years ago, allowing for formerly incarcerated people to vote here in Pennsylvania and throughout the country. So while we're organizing the 100 million people to advocate collectively for social, political, and collective social, political, and economic power, the one thing that we will be doing is always registering and always deeply engaged in grassroots politics, all the way up through to the White House. So, we're just going to be, we are the largest dormant voting bloc in the history of this country. And we aim to make it not so, but to make us the most powerful and formidable voting bloc in the history of this country. And it's only a problem that was rooted in the Quakers' belief that leaving somebody locked alone in a cell is an answer to them finding themselves. And that's why our incarceration system is spread all over the world. I know that that's not true, that when you leave a person alone, as Seth said, for a period of 10 days, they begin to lose themselves. And so we're just going to advocate as people living with arrested convictions on behalf of the 100 million people to come together and to just stand up as a people who will not be marginalized, will not be run over, because we are the best of this country. We're more American than anyone in this country. And when we're leading, our communities are thriving. And so that's the goal.
Thank you. Really brief, Seth, and then we'll open it up for questions. Where do we go from here as a democracy in this space?
I think we have to just find people where they are and educate them, and show them why this transformation is necessary. So when I tried to transform the criminal justice system in Philadelphia, different people have different reasons that they're listening to. Okay, let me use that for our own good, right? So some people saw that the criminal justice system was not working because it wasn't helping the defendants reduce recidivism. People getting arrested at a rate of 63% of the people who were getting arrested, sending away to state prison, were getting rearrested within 3 years. We're spending $40,000 a year for them to be incarcerated, and it's a broken system. So the Mother Teresa on the far left would say the system's broken, it's not helping them. The right-wing bankers would say it's not working because on the return on investment, it's a broken system. Okay, they're both right. So let me talk to all these different people to show them that the system's not working, get them engaged in however they want to get engaged, but make the necessary changes that the empirical data and science show us that instead of sending somebody to jail for X years, well, let's just address their drug addiction. Let's address this criminogenic need of theirs, and we'll fix the system at a fraction of the cost, like the diversionary program that I replicated that Kamala Harris had created in San Francisco called Back on Track. We call it The Choice of Yours here in Philadelphia, and it worked. So that's a brief answer. I'll let you get to your questions.
Okay, so before we go to the questions, I want the audience to thank Seth Williams, Dr. Pam Key, Brother William Cobb. I want to thank you all personally. I want to leave you with Isaiah 6:8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am, send me." God has sent Pam. God has sent Seth. God has sent William. God has sent me. And these are not the remarks of me as the executive director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission or any other title. This was channeled to me through the Holy Spirit in this very moment. We want to open it up to the audience that may have some questions for one of our panelists. Feel free to unmute yourself. We want your questions or comments to be very brief so that we can just get off of this call and just rest our very spirits. But we thank you for being very, very patient. Any question for any of our panelists, please feel free to come on and ask.
I have a question. Shaniqua Kent. So I like what Dr. Key said. She said, I'm not my experience. It does not matter what you call me, but what I answer to.
Amen.
My question centers around the fact that I believe everybody, when they have a pinnacle moment in their life, I like to call it, they have a reckoning with the universe.
Okay.
So as you know, you guys lay your head down, and this could be for anybody, when you lay your head down to sleep at night, I want to know, do you dream about the prison experience and trauma as it relates to the criminal offense, or has your redemptive experience healed you?
Ooh, so I don't think about my prison experience or the trauma. And healing is ongoing.
I don't think about the prison experience at all in my sleep. I just get reminded every day when I walk because they don't let you forget. But I would say to you that in my sleep, what I pray for is the strength, is the opportunity, one, to wake up the next day and make sure that I left something or someone better the next day than where I found them, including myself. And I'm still healing.
For me, as a person who's not been incarcerated, when I do lay down, I do pray and I do think long and hard about those young people who have had a parent incarcerated in a state of federal prison. Some years ago, when I was married, my then wife, she started a nonprofit called Family, which was an acronym for fostering, adopting, and mentoring to improve the lives of youth. And we had a major grant that will pair mentors with youth who had parents incarcerated in a state of federal prison. So it's always on my mind, just like all forms of suffering. And I've been away from the work for the past 3 years, now that I've been at the PHRC, but I thank God that he's used a bill to bring me back into this space.
As for me, I think about the men that I met, who I thought many of them were the victims of just a punitive system that didn't need to be there. A guy that was there for lying on his resume, got a year sentence, and just crazy stuff that the feds do. So I think often about those people. I don't dream and think about my own experience. Yesterday, I went to pay my restitution, and I had to go to the federal courthouse, which was the building where I went. I was on trial. I walked past the federal detention center. So that caused me some real thoughts and emotions walking past that building, and which is right next to, again, the African American History Museum. It's just a crazy juxtaposition of stuff. But that's what I think about more, is just those that I learned from. And even though my nickname in prison was the professor, I learned much more from those men than I could have taught them. And I'm just grateful for that experience.
Other questions? Okay, if there's no more questions, the ayes have it. We want to thank you for tuning in to this edition of PHRC and Redeems Talk on prison transformation, human transformation, resiliency, and redemption. Once again, want to thank the panelists. Everybody have a good night.
Take care.
Peace and
Thank
love,
you.
y'all. This is incredible.
Love.
Thank you very much. God is good.
All the
All the
time.
time. All the time.
God is good.
Thanks so much, Lynette.